is Alina, and you're listening to Your PharmD Bestie. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Your PharmD Besties. Please excuse my scratchy voice. I was at karaoke the previous night, and I sang a little bit too much, so it's a little bit scratchy. So hope you don't mind that it sounds a little bit rough, but I'm excited for this episode because I get to show, again, another wonderful spreadsheet that I created to discuss or talk about which residency programs I wanted to apply for. So this year I'm only applying for one residency program, but last year when I went through the application process, I was looking at a whole bunch of residency programs. If you recall in the last episode, I briefly went over the forecast portal and what the application process looks like. Today, I want to dive a little bit deeper into how to decide which residency program to apply to. So step one for me is to create a spreadsheet. I think it's a really easy and efficient way to organize information. And I'll actually pull up the spreadsheet that I created last year to kind of organize information that I found out about the residency programs I was interested in. So I wanted to stay in California. So you'll notice that the programs I applied for are all in California, spread out from NorCal to SoCal, or Northern California to Southern California. And there's a range. So some of these programs I applied PGY1, acute care track or general track. And for those programs, besides Scripps Memorial, the rest of them, I did that because they had a PGY2 in HSPAL, and that was ultimately the track that I was interested in going down. So I considered applying for programs that had a PGY1 acute care / general, but a PGY2 in HSPAL. I also applied for the combined PGY1 and PGY2 HSPAL programs in California. There are only 4 currently, actually 5 this year because Santa Clara's is now combined as well. Last year it was not combined, so it was separated PGY1 and PGY2. But the other 4 are UCSF's combined PGY1, PGY2 program, UC Davis, Sutter Health Sacramento, and also Stanford's Lucille Packard's, which I did not end up applying to because I did not see myself working specifically with pediatric population. So this was my list. You can probably imagine it was actually much longer than this. These are all highlighted green because I had to hone down and figure out which ones I wanted to actually apply for out of all the ones that I originally had interest in. So as you can see, I organized it by program name and location. And location mattered for me, kind of. Again, California, I'm from San Diego, so half of these programs are located in San Diego. The other half are around the Bay Area, and I was comfortable with living in those areas. I listed the RPD, so resident program director, resident program coordinator, and resident information here. So people that I could easily get in touch with if I had more questions about the program. I listed the number of positions available, the deadline for the application, number of letter writers required for each program. And for example, this program here, their website specifically stated that they wanted 1 clinical preceptor and 2 others from either a clinical preceptor, clinical faculty, or former employee or employer. And they also suggested that these letter writers be able to talk about certain qualifications, such as time management, organization, acceptance of constructive criticism, ability to demonstrate independence and resourcefulness, ability to work effectively and communicate effectively with others. So things like that, I noted those down. So when I did reach out to my letter writers, I also included like a little blurb that, this program would prefer seeing these qualifications be talked about in the letter. Just an FYI when you write it. And then I also listed the types of PGY2 programs that they offered. And this is important, especially if you're interested in acute care or a general program. Chances are you're probably thinking about applying for a PGY2. And so consider what types of PGY2 programs are available if you go there for PGY1. Some programs offer early commit, some don't. Is it easier, or has it been known to be easier in the past for a PGY1 at that program to get into their PGY2? Those are all things that you should assess and consider when you apply for a program. I also wrote down rotations. So this was more for me to get an idea of what kind of core rotations are required and what electives are available. I also preferred programs that had shorter rotation lengths. So for example, 4 weeks versus 6 weeks. This year, this was something that I gathered from talking with other people at UC Davis. Our rotations are 4 weeks long. So by the time that we had early commit to UC specific PGY2 programs, our residents had already gone through at least 2 to 3 rotations, whereas at other UCs where their rotations were 6 weeks long, they may have only gone through 1 or 2 rotations. So then you want to consider whether that gives you more experience to talk about when you apply for the early commit process or not. And for me specifically, because I was interested in admin, I was looking for programs that had more admin experience and opportunities during their PGY1 year and also PGY2 year. So I factored all of those in and wrote those down. Salary and benefits, probably not something that you want to ask a program the first time you talk to them, but it is important. And especially if you are planning to go to a new state for a residency program, considering what types of benefits are available for you is also really important. Days of vacation, sick leave, holidays off, do they give you time off to go to professional conferences? Are those required? How many conferences are required for you to go to? And are there reimbursements offered? Those are also important to ask. I would highly suggest that you try to figure that out before you apply. And then staffing is also important. Some programs do every 3 weekend staffing models. Others do every other weekend staffing. Some programs don't require staffing. So really up to you and what you're trying to get out of it. I could not see myself in a program where I would have to staff every other weekend, just because I know that I would probably burn out pretty fast, and I wanted to be able to have time to enjoy my hobbies outside of my career. And so I factored that into this column here. Also important to factor in research. Some questions that I asked when I talked to programs included how much support the residents felt that they had in selecting their research topic. Were the deadlines reasonable? Were the preceptors and advisors helpful? Did they come with a list of potential research ideas, or did you have to figure something out yourself and build up from the ground? Those are all pretty essential, I would say, to how busy your residency year will be and what to expect. So also something to keep in mind. Teaching, if you are applying to an academic institution, highly likely that you will be required to precept or be part of a teaching program. It's also a bonus if the program does offer like a teaching certificate. You never know, down the line, wherever you're working at, maybe you will find joy in helping new interns or residents or employees fit into the program. So I personally really value teaching and precepting, so my programs that I applied for all had an element of teaching to it. Extra notes that I included, if for example, HSPAL program offered an MBA or MHA program, what did that entail? Also, other questions that I asked too and wrote notes on, I created a list of them. So for example, did you feel supported? What has the program done to help you work towards your goals and tailor to your desired experiences? Flexibility of the program. As a PGY1, were you able to get more information about PGY2 programs during your time as a resident? What is your staffing like? Things that you should definitely get a feel of. I also liked asking questions about how involved the RPDs and RPCs are with the resident, how close-knit the resident cohort was, if there were committees or people assigned to create like socials and get-togethers for everyone, because for me, like I really valued a cohort that is tight-knit, and so that also highly factored into where I ended up applying. And then programs that required supplemental essays, I looked into all of that and made note here. What is sheet 5? I think this was kind of like, I don't remember what this list was, but it is not very different from this initial tab that I just showed earlier. So this was how I organized information and how it helped me decide which programs I wanted to apply to. And I definitely highly encourage that you do the same and go to the pharmacy conferences so that you can network and really figure out whether the program that you're interested in vibes with you. So there's that. Now I'm going to move on to talking about the interview process. So I gave a brief insight in the previous episode that if you're applying to, for example, 10 programs, and let's say you get offered 7 interviews, that's at least 7 days that you have to take off from rotations to complete those interviews. And not only that, keep in mind that some programs do have pre-rounds. So last year when I applied, some programs had pre-interviews. So they would ask to do a phone interview. They would ask you to answer questions from a Google document, whether that tested you on like pharmacy clinical knowledge or just asked you more information about why you're interested in a program. And then they would go through a selection process and offer you a second round of interviews, which was usually the last round. And also, because we are kind of coming out of the COVID era, I would expect that there are more interviews in person. And so keep in mind too that besides just requesting the day off for the day of the interview, you might have to request days off to commute and travel to wherever you're interviewing at. So just keep all of that in mind. I know that last year, a lot of my classmates had a lot of trouble figuring out how to make up time for their rotations if they were requesting too many days off for interviews, which unfortunately, like I'm a advocate of having the ability to maximize the opportunities that you have. So like being able to go to all the interviews that you get offered, I think would be most ideal, but sometimes that's not realistic, unfortunately. So just keep that in mind and make sure that you're communicating with your preceptors at all times in terms of where you're at with the interview process. I know that some of my classmates last year had to actually reject interviews because they couldn't take that time off, and they had to kind of reprioritize which programs they actually wanted to interview for. So that kind of goes back to, if you applied for a lot of programs, make sure that you're applying to programs that you really see yourself going to, because it really sucks when you have to reject the opportunity to interview them because of timing constraints or external factors. So when you're actually preparing for interviews, most programs, let's say like acute care and general programs, will have two portions. So one is the more behavioral and situational interview questions. So this is what you may be used to when you're applying for pharmacy school or you're applying for jobs in general. I would start off with searching up like top 10 or 20 interview questions that you may get in general, and work off of those. This portion of the interview, the institution really wants to get to know what kind of person you are and how you fit into their institution. So it's a vibe check. And it's also crucial to think of it as a conversation, one that helps to alleviate any nervousness or stress that you might have going in, because if you're able to understand that the interview process is really for both sides to figure out if you mesh and if it is the right fit, then you'll understand that there's really not that much pressure, or as much pressure as you think there is, to perform well. Like, you should perform well, but it's not a trick and it's not the end of the world to show a little bit of personality. And that's what they're looking for, instead of like a standard answer response to what can you bring to the table, what makes you stand out. Talk about, your passions and really show that you care about what you do and why you're applying for residency, and specifically why that program, right? So, very general tips. Also, for situational questions, this may be, for example, asking you to discuss a situation when you experience conflict with a teammate, or someone wasn't pulling their weight, or if you had a difficult clinical case that you experienced during rotations, how did you deal with it? How did you resolve the conflict? Absolutely pay attention to using the STAR method. If you are not aware of what that is, basically going down, S stands for situation, T for task, A for the answer, and R for the result. So briefly touching on what the situation was before you talk about what your job and responsibility was in that situation, and how did you ultimately find an answer to it and resolve it, which I would argue that you should spend a little more time going through that rather than explaining the situation. That's a pitfall that some people go through when they're interviewing, is they tend to kind of run in circles trying to explain a situation, when in reality, if you think about it on the other side, as someone who's interviewing, I can probably understand a situation pretty well if you describe it in 1 to 2 sentences, but now I'm interested in how you handled it. So being able to describe your action and how you tackled it, and then what the result was, arguably has more meaning than just spending a lot of time talking about what the problem was to begin with. So that's a really good way to prepare for those types of questions. And then now the other aspect of interview is the clinical portion. Even if you're applying for an HSPAL or admin program, keep in mind that most programs are PGY1 acute care focused before you get into the admin stuff in PGY2. So they obviously want to know that you have some sort of clinical foundation. I've had interviews where they presented me with a case, gave me some time to work it up, and we discussed the answers to it, or they would ask me questions about the case. I've had interviews where they just sat me down and started asking me clinical questions of all types, of all different disease states, just to understand what my baseline was. There's also programs that value listening to you walk through your process. So let's say that you don't know the answer to a question about like infectious disease. A patient has like community acquired pneumonia and they have these labs that appear on their chart. What do you give them? What antibiotic do you recommend? Let's say like you don't remember what the first line options are, or you're not really sure about how to tackle it. Take a step back. Think about if you were on rotation and you saw a patient like this, what would you be thinking about? What would you be looking at on their chart? And talk through it with the person who is interviewing you. I found that a lot of times some programs may not actually expect you to know the answer, but they want to know that you know what resources to look at. So for example, guidelines like IDSA, and also what labs to consider to make sure that you are coming to the most appropriate answer and antibiotic choice for the patient. So that's a very like specific example, but it's really helpful to have someone practice that with you and for you to be able to walk through your answer clearly and efficiently. So those are my tips for the interview process. And generally, again, I'm expecting interviews to be more in person this year. Please remember to be cordial, to be on time, dress to impress, just the basic formalities of interview etiquettes. Those are definitely still very important to be mindful of, especially when we are going into a professional career. And yeah, those are the tips and tricks I have for interviewing. I'm happy to dive deeper into it, or if you even want to have mock interview sessions, I'm happy to offer a couple out for any listeners. For like the first 3 to 5 people who reach out or DM us, I'm happy to organize and coordinate something. So that comes to the end for this episode of the podcast. I'm sure that you probably have a lot of questions and curiosities regarding figuring out which residency program to apply for, how to stand out as a candidate, how to prepare best for the application and interview process. Believe me, I had a lot of questions, and even after having talked to upperclassmen and people who have gone through it before, I usually had to go back a couple more times to ask follow-up questions. So our DMs are open. Please feel free to reach out to us on social media, and I will return answers to any questions that we receive. And as always, thanks for tuning in to this episode. Feel free to subscribe, leave reviews, leave a like, follow us on social media. I'm very thankful for you all for helping to support this podcast. And I hope that you continue to get insight and helpful tips from it to help you progress through your career. So thank you again. I'll see you at the next episode.